before I start, can I ask, is it all right if I record this presentation? Does anybody object to that? Okay, thank you. So welcome to my project. I'm happy to close up the day, hopefully keep the energy up after 2 days straight of presentations. My project is called the Downtown Blueway, which is a master plan for downtown Minneapolis with kind of the idea of as the city of Minneapolis as the main client here. And it's proposing a transformation from dead parking to dense urban habitat over the next 30 years. And the why is because between post-COVID work patterns, autonomous transportation, and climate change, downtown must transform from a 20th century planning paradigm to one suited for the 21st and beyond. The strategy that I'm employing is to really target the worst half of parking for redevelopment, reprioritize pedestrian, cyclist, public transit, and autonomous ridership as the preferred way to get downtown and to move downtown. Connect the grand rounds through downtown to attract pedestrian-oriented development and manage water joyfully and responsibly. So downtown has transformed several times in the past 200 years, going from a powerful place of gathering for the Dakota people to a flour mills and sawmills, an industrial landscape with streetcar lines then spreading out to sprawl over the city, replaced by shopping and the car, and now offices, which are in crisis. Just recently, housing has been increasing, and on the horizon, we have a new form of transportation that will transform our relationship with parking. So this is just to reiterate the landscape that we generated in conjunction with the car. And for about 100 years, we did everything we could to make parking as cheap and available as possible everywhere in the city. And despite this strategy, we have now office spaces that are 30% vacant, and now the rest that are remaining are 74% hybrid. We have 50% of the commuters coming into downtown compared to what this was designed for. And when business is not in operation, much of downtown is just dead, vacant space. This is not the landscape that will come along with autonomous vehicles. And I'll get into this in more detail later, but the driving purpose of this project is to reimagine what we can do with this parking space to create vibrant habitat for 21st century life, addressing the challenges of climate adaptation, the housing crisis, and water stewardship. And there's a lesson we can learn from 1891 when the city was first expanding out into the what's now the rest of Minneapolis. The same year the streetcars were being laid, powered by water, Horace Cleveland urged the city to think 100 years into the future and secure the water bodies around Minneapolis as public land so that it wouldn't just be aimlessly taken up by private development and become someone's backyards. Now this created the foundation of the Grand Rounds, which is very much at the heart of the identity of Minneapolis. We are a city that lives very closely with water and celebrates water and bikes around water, gets on the water, enjoys the water. And much of our recreation is focused on water. And this is also true in the winter. You can see people cross-country skiing and fat tire biking on the Grand Rounds year-round, this is really about half the year. It looks like this. So part of this project is to expand on the best idea we ever had and bring the infrastructure of the Grand Rounds deeper into downtown. So anyone who lives downtown has the entire regional park system at their doorstep, as well as for people who are coming in from elsewhere in the city. They have a clear way to move on a bike or a scooter or on foot into the heart of downtown, and that they don't have to navigate just a bunch of highways full of cars and parking. On the downtown scale, this is going to link our existing parks, starting from Loring Park here, through the Loring Greenway, Convention Center Plaza, Government Plaza, the Commons, and then up right to the Falls and the Stone Arch Bridge. So this is the route that later on in the presentation I'll sort of walk you through. The city has recently been sort of moving from parking towards housing. This is just 20 years ago. The riverfront, right by the falls, you would think would be, one of the most desirable places to live, was a post-industrial parking wasteland. You can see them beginning to build Gold Medal Park here, and the city, signaled an investment in this space. And 20 years later, we have 2 blocks worth of fairly dense housing that is, changing the entire meaning of downtown, and it's already becoming a place where people are living. So my project is hopefully going to bring some of this energy and the connection to water deeper into downtown, which is, as you'll see, is a parking wasteland. So the strategy here is to target the 50% of parking that is the easiest to transform and the most harmful to urban life. And if we reduce parking by 50%, we can free up 85% of the surface area of parking, or 19% of downtown. I'll get into that in more detail later. With that space, we could almost quadruple the housing downtown, and become as dense as some of the most livable cities in the world, with 18-hour street activation, plus hopefully 18-hour activation of the Skyway. Decoupled from parking, housing can be 20% less expensive than it otherwise would be, and we can combat rising housing costs throughout the region by building more dense housing here. This system is going to manage water much more responsibly and joyfully than we do now. Currently, we just pollute the river with water polluted by cars and everything associated with them. This will get 63% more green and blue space and 3 times more water infiltrated and evapotranspirated than we do today, and eliminate the worst of the pollution to the river. We can also adapt to climate change in 2 critical ways, one of which is creating more density downtown so that we're reducing sprawl, and create power generation. It's basically emissions reduction. And the other is, of course, just being aware that Minneapolis is a place where people from more vulnerable places are going to want to move to as climate change creates more fires and flooding elsewhere. All in all, this is going to transform about 27% of the surface area of downtown from, again, only touching parking, to one that has 29% more space for buildings, 48% more space for green space, and just the general pedestrian public realm. And I'm going to get all of this into some more detail here. I do want to talk about the car thing, because this was the kind of the research that spawned this whole project, even though it's grown beyond that. And just to reflect for a moment that in 1904, no one saw the car coming, really. I mean, the New York Times thought it was going to be just like a fad for rich people. And 15 years later, it had roughly taken over the country and began transforming every American city, and certainly ripping apart downtowns. And we're at this moment here with autonomous transportation, and I know there are a lot of skeptics about it, but I'm hopefully can at least convince you that we should consider it seriously, even if it's still uncertain. So after the introduction of the car, we transformed our city to produce as much parking as we possibly could, thinking that would be the solution to modern life and modern living. And of course, what it created was a lot of dead space, and not a pedestrian texture of life. Much of downtown looks like this today. Blank walls, blank parking, very wide streets for cars, and then of course cars parked all in the street. There's very little street life because downtown is about as dense as a single-family housing neighborhood. There's not much to do on the street, and largely because it's all just parking. Even our skyscrapers, just sit on top of little surface parking lots. And again, parking. So we began to turn the corner on this in 2009. We ended downtown minimum parking requirements. In 2021, that went citywide. So we've finally learned the lesson that this is not the solution to urban space. And hopefully we can go in the other direction and begin actually actively encouraging people to use other modes of transportation other than driving and parking their own car. The stakes are very high on this because sprawl that is generated by this type of development and this type of approach to downtown development it constitutes a large part of our GHG emissions. Transportation's about 40% of our emissions, and this is the type of development that produces that. We have a climate crisis that obviously is ramping up year after year, and a lot more people are going to be moving here from more vulnerable places, and I include myself in that category. I would probably be living in New Orleans after this semester were it not for the flooding that's increasing there. parking has also made housing more expensive by bundling it into it, and made all sorts of housing types in the middle sort of unbuildable based on our zoning. So we need a new paradigm, and like I've already reiterated, dense, verdant urban life is the goal. This is a diagram of the waste in our parking system. Here are all the cars that are driving over the course of a day. 10% during rush hour, 90% parked, most of the time 95% parked. And then here's the spare parking that is empty at any given time. And so this is a diagram of the same thing. For every car that's actually on the road, there's 150 parking stalls with 19 parked cars in them. Now, if 1 out of 8 parking lots is a structured parking garage, that would be $55,000 a year in yearly cost to maintain that infrastructure, which is we all pay for mostly indirectly. We all spend car owners spend about $10,000 a year to own a car, and an additional about $4,000 to $5,000 in parking costs, which are mostly just built into everything else that we spend money on, with exception of if you pay for parking in a garage. So this is 24% of our spending goes to this, and I don't think anybody feels like their transportation constitutes 24% of their value in life, or the things that they value. This is why I'm very optimistic and excited about autonomous transportation. So you can watch this video, it's about an hour long, and will help explain why this is the likely cost of future transportation in an autonomous context. This is assuming that people are not owning these cars, but essentially you can imagine an autonomous Uber, or more likely a subscription-based service that is just wraparound transportation needs. There's more cars already picking up people today than Uber was in 2010. So this is happening right now. Obviously, there's still beta testing, and they're getting better every year. So this could be in the next 5 to 10 years when these are available here. The likely economic model is what we've seen before. Everything else in the digital revolution is going from a personal copies model and storage model of consumption to one that is about streaming and using resources efficiently. So long story short, $1 per mile versus 20 cents a mile. And what this also means for getting downtown is that a round trip downtown, currently today, if you're 20 minutes out, you're paying about $15 to $18 for gas and to park. It'll cost about $5 to $6, once this is available. Now, in this context, when it's this cheap to get downtown without parking your car, I don't think there's any more reason that the city would subsidize parking and provide this much parking downtown. This should be a private sector thing. If you want to drive and park a car, you can do that on the free market. It's not in the city's interest to provide this, certainly not at a discount. So this is all the public parking we have today. And so the question is, how can we use all this space better? So in the post-parking downtown, if the city, well, first of all, I'll just get you oriented with our city here. Here are our park systems, our parks. Here are there's the business core. So this is what's 30% vacant, 74% hybrid. It's at 50% capacity, and all these businesses are in just crisis right now. Are certainly the building owners. Hotels, and then residential. So these neighborhoods here are, fairly fragmented. If you take this area in total, this is, like I said, about ultimately like a single family residential density. We do have some, great things downtown. We have colleges, cultural and event centers, theaters, etc. And then here, back again, everything together. Now what you see is black is car space. And then turning on parking, you can see that there. So the strategy here is to keep the underground parking and the ramps that are integrated into buildings. These are facilities that aren't going anywhere anyway. That constitutes 60% of our parking stalls, but only takes up 15% of our surface area. And the rest, I'm proposing we really rethink what it is and make it not parking in the future. All parking, 21% of downtown surface area. There's our ramps to keep connected into the Skyway system. We can green the roofs and power transportation with solar. This ramp alone could power 5.5 million trips downtown, or replace all the miles for 7,000 drivers. We can also use the space for recreation, and then green roofs for managing water. And a section here, the Skyway system could become the place where you still have essentially a pickup drop-off lobby for these cars that would wait 15 minutes, and as you approach, you're leaving work, they come down and whisk you off. You can get out of this faster than you do today. And this 50,000 parking stalls here could power 6 times as many trips as the 100,000 we have today. Here's the rest of the parking again. Fairly simple. I'm proposing we give street parking back to the public realm. I believe that 50 years from now, we will look back at the pictures of our streets today littered with people's private property. The rest, surface parking lots and structured parking, I'm proposing becomes mostly housing and green space. And so here's the restitched city core compared to the existing. And here's the total, changes. So going from 38% of the space for cars to down to 15, 21% of parking down to 2, and then more space for green space and buildings for housing. And again, just the same to get a sense of what thing is changing to what. I want to talk about housing for a second, because what is that much? How much housing could you get out of 10% of downtown? At 6 levels of housing, that would get us 2.5 times the current density. That would bring us from a single-family residential density to Philadelphia city center or the Chicago Loop. If we were an average of 10 stories, that gets us into comparable to Toronto, and in shooting distance of some of the cities that are consistently listed as the most livable places on earth. So it's not that much. I mean, 10 levels of housing is not skyscrapers. And if we're smart about how we zone for form here, we can ensure that taller buildings are on the south side of the block, shorter buildings on the north side of the block, so that we don't overshade our streets, because we are a very cold place and it sucks to walk around in the shade in the winter. Likewise, in our street design, we can bias the sunny side of the street for more people and more plants. We're putting the car space on the south side of the street in the shade, so that there's always a really beautiful way to move through space in the sun for the half the year that it's just extremely cold. And so a typical street section, going from something like this, essentially a highway down the middle with a very dangerous bike lane that's usually has a car in it or snow in it, becomes a place that's more for people and plants and just dense vegetation. A better view of it here to get a sense of the street section. This would be like a typical downtown street. We'd have a place finally to manage snow. Currently, we just kind of throw it wherever on the sidewalk and into the bike lane. And then in springtime, when this is melting, this is going to move through these shared tree trenches that will ultimately make their way to the Blueway, where it'll be daylit. And well, of course, there is salt that we'll need to contend with, so plants that can deal with salt and shade. Now, where that water hits the Blueway armature here, I'm proposing we bring it up and daylight it and enjoy it, and evapotranspirate it, as well as clean it and oxygenate it. All in all, this is going to remove, go from 81% runoff, which is mostly polluted car space, to mostly transpiration and infiltration, with runoff really just from roofs, which are, it's fairly clean water. I'm going to skip over this, but we'll need to take some care. Learn from the Dutch about how they separate transit. Some streets are going to be more oriented towards public transit or the car. Some streets are going to be more oriented towards pedestrians and bikes, and these overlapping networks will work together but create better spaces for all users. All right, part 3. We're going to talk. I'm just going to walk through the Blueway. So it's a lot of left brain stuff. Now we're just going to enjoy some visuals. Again, the idea here is we're going to use this girdle of parking that's currently surrounding downtown core, and sort of carve a new way to move through the park system, because all this parking lot is disrupting the rhythm of our existing parks here. And so moving from Loring Park where I'm just going to walk through kind of this sequence here, from Loring Park through the Greenway to the Commons to a new rainwater park, and then up Portland Avenue to the Falls. This is Loring Park. It's a beautiful park. It's surrounded by dense housing that is old and beautiful, as well as some new towers. This is the Loring Greenway. It was built in '75. Beautiful space, only bikes and pedestrians that connect the park to Nicollet Ave. It uses water as this features along the whole thing to kind of activate the space and give you a sense of place there and connection to the Loring Lake. And currently it dumps you off at Nicollet Avenue Mall, which is supposed to be kind of a pedestrian street, but it's really a bus terminal. And I'm proposing that we just use this other new park that was recently kind of finished. We connect to that and then connect up into downtown through what's now this parking cluster, one of the worst places in the city, in my opinion. This is a city-owned ramp next to a privately owned parking lot. I'm proposing the city buy this and combine the two into a new park. So it would go from something like this to something like this with new housing benefiting from the investment in this space. This is also the stormwater park, so this is where all the stormwater from these streets would ultimately make it to if they don't evapotranspirate first. We're going to use the basement of that ramp as the pond, basically, before and after. This is the walk through that first entry. This is the entry from the Loring Greenway. This is it today. I'm proposing something more like this with just one lane of traffic for accessing these buildings and then a much wider space for pedestrians and bikes on the left, with a large space for water and vegetation kind of running down the middle. Then you hit the convention center park, and you turn, and what's currently, again, highway parking would become something more like this with housing on either side, kind of step back to give some more space. And then you'd approach into the park, which would feel something like this. This is, again, the existing garage structure just preserved and turned into an urban waterfall. And then this whole thing would just recirculate water and clean it. I use a lot of AI for making some of these. So this is just to give some sense of like atmosphere of, the summer and winter, and inspiration for what this might feel like in winter, ice skating on the lake, kind of a frozen falls, like mini Ha-Ha Falls that you could get to from, out your front door. And at night you can imagine how this could be programmed with light and just, again, engaging with ice and water in its frozen form. And here's sort of the plan for it. Now, without needing to build new housing with parking, that means that our building doesn't have to be determined by parking, right? So we can activate the street on either side and overlook the park. I'm proposing a connection to the Skyway system, so this would be a public space that finally you can actually enter the Skyway in a legible way, and you don't have to go through some corporate building to get there. So this space here would sort of mediate between the Skyway level and the street level and just overlook the park. I'll just skip this. You could do all sorts of stuff. If you're not paying for parking, that 20% that would otherwise go to that might go to saunas or pools, amenities, whatever people actually want in their lives, besides storage. And of course, you have a nice view. Moving from this to you can see how this becomes in a rhythm of these existing parks, moving to Government Plaza and then the Commons, or going up to Portland. And at minimum, this connection would be on a very good street. If I had more time, I'd want to consider these more carefully. But I do want to talk about the Commons and the connection between here to the falls and the river. Currently, this is what it is currently. You see the lock and dam, which is now closed. They're planning a re-envision of this whole area, which would be great if it happens. So my connection here would reinforce that if so. And it's similar to the streets before. I'm trying to minimize car use. In this case, disconnecting the road from the Grand Rounds Road here, so that this would, as far as cars are concerned, be more of like a service road or alley, keeping access to all these buildings, but trying to minimize car use on the street, so that pedestrians and water have more space. And so this is that final, as you're approaching the river, this is it today. And I'm proposing, again, similar to the early ones, this kind of continuous water wall and space to, of course, space to get into any cars that you might want, but moving towards the river. And at night we could light it up, hopefully better than this. Here's a section. You can see here how this would become like a pickup zone, kind of shape that wall becomes a seating as you get picked up by a car. And just trying to get as much soil in here for growing big trees as possible. And then this is from the river looking back up into it. So this is the other gateway into the city. This is currently where you would enter if you're coming on a bike from the Grand Rounds, from the bridge or along the river. This is it today. And it's a 20-foot change here. And this would become where you'd have really like an opportunity to cascade water and have a big moment of water where it opens up and kind of greets you. The city greets you with a wet handshake. I never said that in practice. I don't know why it came out. And then eventually, hopefully, with 1,000 cubic feet of soil for all these trees, they could actually grow really big, unlike our street trees today, which die after 13 years. So that's the Blueway, and the center of this armature, and perhaps phase one of this whole expansion of de-parking our city would be emphasizing this investment here. And in conclusion, 50% reduction in parking gets us almost 4 times as much housing, more green space, green energy, healthier water cycle, more green space, blue space, eliminating runoff, and planning for climate migration to the city. And the downtown would be transformed from a car park to an urban oasis. Thank you.
Thank you, Connor, for those 3 Capstone projects.